They called her America's first female serial killer, a raven-haired innkeeper who poured poison like hospitality and sent travelers through trapdoors into the earth. Her name still slips down Charleston's old brick alleys like a warning, Lavinia Fisher. But here's the fracture that splits the legend in two. Lavinia Fisher was never convicted of murder. Not one. No bodies in the cellar, no murder verdict. Just a gallows, a crowd, and an ugly certainty that the city wanted someone to blame. Tonight, we unspool the rope between fact and folklore. Picture Charleston in winter. February, 1820. A wooden scaffold against a pale sky. Two condemned figures led from the old city jail. One is a woman, defiant, unrepentant, infamous. The papers will swear she laughed at the crowd. The storytellers will insist she promised to deliver a message straight to the devil himself. Truth, performance, or the last gasp of a myth being born. This is not a tale of ghost tours and candlelight. This is a story about a city on edge, a road cut with robberies, the hysteria that follows violence, and what happens when a woman steps into a role the public is already hungry to see. Monster. By the end, you will know what the records say. You will hear what the legends insist, and you will decide which voice deserves the last word. Because between a cup of poisoned tea and a court record scratched in ink lies the space where American folklore is forged, and it wears Lavinia's face. Let's walk the road that led her here. In the early 1800s, Charleston was a paradox, wealth and fear in the same breath. Plantations fed a merchant city where ships from everywhere dumped cargo, rumor, and temptation along the waterfront. Outside the city limits, the road stretched north and west, a ribbon of opportunity for travelers, traders, and thieves. There was no national police force, no modern forensics. Law and order came down to sheriffs, militias, and citizens who were tired of being preyed on. Robbery along the post roads wasn't new, but 1819 brought panic. Money was tight. People were desperate. When wagons disappeared or travelers arrived in town with bruises and stories, the city listened. Between Charleston and its outskirts rose a chain of wayfarer houses, inns where you could water your horse, find a bed, and hear the latest gossip. One of them sat roughly 6 miles from the city line, near a stretch of road that ran quiet at night and suspiciously busy in the day. It would be remembered by one name again and again, the 6 Mile House. On paper, it was just an inn. In whispers, it was a layer cake of crimes, stolen goods in the back room, lookouts in the trees, and a pair of proprietors who smiled too wide and asked too many questions about how much money a guest was carrying. When the vigilance committees started forming, citizens banding together to police the roads, the 6 Mile House drew their eye like storm light does the sea. Too many travelers passed through there and never came back. Too many rumors braided into a single knot, and at its center, a woman whose beauty seemed to sharpen the fear, not soften it. That woman was Lavinia Fisher, and whether she deserved the future waiting on that scaffold would depend on what the city believed about the past that led to her in-us front door. We know less about Lavinia's early life than legend suggests. Records from the period don't paint a childhood portrait. They sketch an outline. A young woman in the orbit of Charleston's rougher economy, married to a man named John Fisher. Together they ran, or at least presided over, a boarding establishment called the 6 Mile Wayfarer House. In the daylight, the place was unremarkable. Horses snorted. Travelers dried their boots by the fire. And Lavinia asked the kind of questions innkeepers ask. Where are you headed? How long will you stay? Routine hospitality. But at the margins of that routine, rumor took root. Some said the Fishers were part of a larger gang, a network that used inns as nets, catching travelers and lightening their loads. Some said stolen goods were fenced through the back door, moved along the road like whispers no one wanted to hear out loud. None of this made the papers glow. Crime was common, and innkeepers walked a thin line between hosting and hustling. But the pattern around this couple grew too dark to ignore. Lavinia, by all accounts, was striking, sharp-tongued and fearless, a woman who would speak when men expected silence. In a society where femininity was supposed to soothe, her presence agitated. That mattered. To the 19th century imagination, a dangerous woman wasn't just a criminal. She was an anomaly, a breach in nature. The idea of a woman preying on travelers provoked equal parts terror and fascination. Enter the legend. Poisoned tea, laughter behind closed doors, a bed with a trapdoor that snapped open like a mouth. The stories don't start here, but they condense around this backstory, this couple, this house, this road. By 1819, the vigilance committees were more than neighborhood watches. They were armed citizens ready to storm problem spots. Complaints piled up. Men robbed near the 5 Mile and 6 Mile houses. Supplies gone missing. Riders ambushed. The 6 Mile house wasn't the only nest, but it had the most unforgettable hosts. Understanding who Lavinia and John were, as people, depends on which documents you trust. Court records call them thieves and assailants. Later storytellers call them murderers. Somewhere between those two verdicts, a marriage functioned in the shadows. Lavinia moving through the common room with quick eyes. John slipping in and out to meet men who weren't paying for a bed. They were partners. That much everyone agrees on. Whether they were partners in murder, that's the question history never stopped asking. The stories bloom like night flowers. A weary traveler stops at the 6 Mile house. Lavinia welcomes him with a bright smile and a cup of tea. A few sips in, his eyelids sag. Something heavy pulls him toward sleep. She shows him to a room, the room, and wishes him a safe night. Then the floor opens. The trapdoor bed, hinges releasing with a clack, mattress pitching forward, sends him tumbling into the cellar. Down there the tale forks. In some versions, men wait to finish what the tea started. In others, spikes make hospitality final. And then there is John Peoples, sometimes written Peebles, the traveler who, so the legend insists, smelled something off in the tea. He poured it into a potted plant, pretended to sleep, and when the bed snapped open beneath him, he landed cat-like on the frame and escaped out the window, sprinting into the dark to warn authorities what waited behind that smiling innkeeper's eyes. It's a cinematic story. Tight, terrifying, complete. It has everything. Poison, cunning, a miraculous escape. It's why ghost tours still stop on that stretch of road and whisper her name. But here is where the fog parts and the records stand, stubborn and unromantic. No contemporary court documents convict Lavinia or John of murder. No ledger notes bodies hauled from a cellar. The trapdoor and the poisoned tea appear most vividly in later retellings, marched forward by newspapers, pamphlets, and finally the tourist economy. What the documents do show is robbery and assault on the roads flanking Charleston, and a vigilance committee convinced that the 6 Mile house was a hub for those crimes. Still, legends don't spring from nothing. The 6 Mile house almost certainly screened travelers. Questions about money, route, and companions were not idle curiosity. If a guest mentioned riding alone with a heavy purse, the road outside had a way of turning dangerous after dusk. Whether Lavinia mixed laudanum into tea or simply into the conversation, the effect was similar. A guest grew comfortable enough to let down his guard. The poisoned tea story persists because it captures an anxiety that haunted 19th century travelers, a fear that the softest things could be traps, a woman's voice, a warm drink, a pillow beneath your head. The Victorian mind was primed to see in female treachery a scandal that scrambled the rules of danger. Robbers with pistols, predictable. A hostess with a smile, nightmare fuel. So when vigilantes turned their eyes to the 6 Mile house, they carried more than suspicion. They carried a script, and the Fishers fit the roles too well. Whatever crimes began cloaked as hospitality would end under a harsher word. And if the public needed more than theft to justify what came next, murder, even whispered, would do. The road to the fall of the Fishers was paved with stories, and stories, once loosed, are hard to put back in the bottle. In early 1819, Charleston Citizen Guard and local officials began systematic sweeps along the roads. Their goal: smash the networks that stalked travelers. The 5 Mile and 6 Mile houses were high on their list. One account describes a vigilance party approaching the 6 Mile house and ordering its occupants to leave town. Another describes a watchman posted near the property, left behind to see who came and went, who was attacked when the house's occupants returned. The details shift between depositions and recollections, but the outcome is clear. The confrontations around the 6 Mile house turned violent. When the dust settled, the Fishers' names were in the crosshairs. Arrests followed. John Fisher and Lavinia Fisher were taken into custody, alongside other suspects believed to be part of the road gang web. Authorities searched the property and surrounding area. They found stolen goods, items travelers claimed had gone missing, enough to paint a pattern, enough to hold the couple while the city exhaled, briefly in relief. Here is the first hard edge of the record. The charges: not murder, highway robbery and related assaults, capital offenses in South Carolina at the time. To the modern ear, it sounds disproportionate. To the world of 1819, robbing a traveler on the King's, or now the Republic's, highway struck at the arteries of commerce. The law answered with the harshest penalty. The trial arrived like a storm. Witnesses spoke of ambushes, of familiar faces at the 6 Mile house, of stolen parcels turning up where they shouldn't. The prosecution's portrait was not subtle. The Fishers weren't merely innkeepers. They were organizers, faces of a network that preyed on anyone unlucky enough to trust them. And Lavinia drew the room's attention. In a courtroom filled with men in coats and cravats, a woman accused of such crimes didn't fade into the scenery. Accounts say she was defiant, sometimes disdainful, a woman who met the court's gaze without blinking. To some jurors, that read as guilt. To others, it read as something almost worse in that era: improper womanhood. The verdicts came back guilty on highway robbery. Both were sentenced to hang. What followed is a chapter the legend rarely lingers on. Months in the old city jail. The building still stands in Charleston, heavy and haunted with stories. Inside, the Fishers waited as lawyers appealed the sentence. They claimed errors, sought reprieve. The appeals failed. The governor didn't intervene. The date approached. Desperation sharpened into action. There was an escape attempt, bedsheets braided into a rope. John slipped down the line. Lavinia followed, but the rope snapped or its length fell short. She hung suspended, trapped between stone and air. By the time guards arrived, the dream of flight was over. Some versions say John refused to flee without her, turning back to custody. Whether chivalry or futility, the result was the same. The cell door closed for good. As the execution day neared, ministers visited. One name surfaces often: a reverend who urged repentance and confession. The city, for its part, wanted closure. Rumors of murders had swelled the crowds and hardened the mood. And though the court had not proven those murders, public feeling cares little for the fine print of indictments. In the public square, narrative functions as a verdict all its own. Note this, because it matters. The Fishers died convicted robbers, not legally recognized murderers. The legend, which would grow louder with time, had not yet devoured the record. That would happen later, on pages that smelled more like ink and imagination than sworn testimony. February 1820. 2 prisoners are led from the old city jail to the scaffold. The crowd is enormous, because executions then weren't just justice, they were spectacle. People brought children. Ministers delivered sermons. The condemned spoke last. John Fisher begged mercy for his soul, exhorted the crowd to avoid sin. He named companions in crime. Some accounts say he tried to cleanse himself with confession, others that he spoke mostly in fear and prayer. Then he stepped into the noose. Lavinia came second. Here, the legend presses its face against the glass. Some say she wore white, as if a bridal gown might affront the sky. Some say she stared down the crowd and laughed. The quote most often painted beneath her portrait is pure fire. "If you have a message for the devil, give it to me. I will carry it myself." Whether she said it, spat it, or merely inspired it, the line made sure she would never be forgotten. In the quieter records, she is described as unyielding, refusing to speak words of repentance she did not believe in. She denied the worst crimes. She declared herself wronged by a city eager to bury its fear in her body. The trapdoor beneath her feet did the rest. The bodies were taken away. No churchyard would receive them. Criminals were folded into the ground where the city allowed. The old city jail swallowed its echoes and returned to routine. And then, almost immediately, the legend grew. The story of the tea sweetened with laudanum, the trapdoor bed, the spikes. These elements hardened, passed from mouth to mouth, pamphlet to pamphlet, guide to guide. The Fishers, especially Lavinia, became shorthand for Southern Gothic villainy. Charleston got what it wanted. The roads grew safer. The citizenry felt absolved. And the most unforgettable face in the story belonged to a woman whose defiance made the perfect, mythic silhouette. She was not just punished, she was immortalized. Not as a thief, but as a monster the city insisted it had tamed. On one side, folklore. Lavinia as the femme fatale with arsenic in the teapot, a secret lever under the mattress, a smile that meant death. The 6 Mile House as a slaughterhouse wearing a wooden grin, bodies in the dark, screams a floor below your pillow, a traveler who saw through it all and ran for his life. On the other, record, charges of highway robbery, possession of stolen goods, assaults tied to road ambushes, a vigilance committee confronting a known criminal hub, convictions that led, legally, to the scaffold. No murder convictions, no list of names, no set of remains that stitched the legends to the courtroom with iron thread. So where does the truth live? The most responsible answer is in between. The Fishers almost certainly belonged to a network that robbed and terrorized travelers. The 6 Mile House looks less like a trapdoor carnival ride and more like a screening room. Spot the vulnerable, pass the word, strike on the road. Lavinia likely played a role. She asked questions, read the answers, and weaponized hospitality. For that, the law, then, made death the price. But serial killer, that label arrives later, wearing hindsight and hunger. It requires bodies and proof we don't have. It requires murder as method, not rumor as atmosphere. And the first half of the 19th century did not routinely record crimes the way we demand now. That gap, between the meticulousness we want and the messiness we have, became a breeding ground for sensationalism. The legend of Lavinia Fisher thrives because it satisfies a cultural itch. It punishes a woman who inverted expectations, it flatters our appetite for macabre theater, and it gives Charleston a myth as marketable as it is chilling. The trapdoor bed is a perfect image. The poison tea is a perfect prop. Perfect images don't need paperwork. So, was she a serial killer? Or a scapegoat built out of fear, misogyny, and moral panic? Perhaps she was neither and both. A criminal made larger than her crimes, magnified until she could haunt a city that already lived with ghosts. Let's lay the evidence on the table like cards. What we have: trial records for highway robbery, mentions of stolen goods, assaults on the road, a vigilance committee that targeted the 6 Mile House, a failed appeal, a hanging in February 1820. What we don't have: primary source proof of a trapdoor bed, no contemporary murder convictions, no list of recovered bodies tied to the Fisher's cellar, the famous quips and theatrics. Many are later embellishments. This does not make Lavinia innocent. It makes her complicated. A woman who lived in the gray fog between crime and narrative, and whose reputation was shaped as much by 19th century sensationalism as by her actions. Newspapers sold copies. Pamphlets sold fear, and a female criminal sold better than any highwayman ever could. The term serial killer didn't exist in Lavinia's lifetime. When we paste it onto her now, we're not just describing, we're branding. That brand has made her a legend, a tourist stop, a campfire staple. It has also blurred the lines between what was proved and what we prefer to picture. So here's where I hand the story to you. Did Charleston hang a murderess, or did it elevate a robber into a monster because the story demanded one? If you had stood by that scaffold, cold wind in your coat, the rope creaking, would you have heard a killer's last breath, or the last words of a woman swallowed by myth? Tell me what you believe. If this kind of deep dive, where we pull legends apart and read the ink beneath the bloodstains, kept you watching, like this video so it finds the people who want the truth with their chills. Subscribe for more dark historical investigations, and comment below with the cases you want unmasked next. I read every theory, every source, every challenge. Legends never die, but the truth, it's patient. It waits for us to look again.